I'm Doug Lichtman, and in this video in the patent series, we're going to think about claim construction. What is claim construction? Well, as you know, at the end of a patent, there are these numbered sentences we call claims. And it's kind of the very official, formal way that the lawyers say, this is what we own. Now, that language, it's drafted by the lawyers, and then they go back and forth with the government, the patent office, as they're working to get a patent to issue. But throughout the patent process, we come back to the language and we ask ourselves, what does it really mean? We push, we prod, we sometimes see some ambiguities, some things that maybe are a little unclear in the language, and we work with the language to construe it, to interpret it, to understand what the claim actually means by looking closely at its language. And in this video, I want to show you some examples, show you a little bit about how that fits in with the patent system overall. Now, I want to begin, as I've done in many of the videos on the patent portion of our work together, by saying explicitly when this comes up. And I keep doing that because patent law has so many touches, so many moments where we look at the document. And I want to make sure that we remember that these issues show up in almost all of them. So for claim construction, for understanding the claims, one time when we look at it is during patent prosecution. When I apply for a patent, I might draft a claim set. I give it to the patent examiner. The examiner looks at the rest of the document and might push back. Might say my language isn't clear, might say my language isn't well supported by the rest of the document. We do this back and forth of what is the right language and what does it mean right away during patent prosecution, that first touch. We might do claim construction again if we come back to the patent office in those IPRs, those proceedings where anybody, you, me, anybody, can bring a patent back and say, hey, government, we probably shouldn't have issued this one, and start a process to look at the patent again. If we do that, if the government accepts a patent to look at a second time, we might once again do claim construction. What do the claims mean? Because we need to know what the claims mean if we're going to figure out, is that claim valid? Think, for example, about obviousness. How do I know if your claim is obvious in light of the prior art? Well, first thing I need to know is, what did you claim, right? What does your claim mean? Then I can evaluate in light of the prior art. So too for anticipation, so too for enablement, for kind of any of the legal tests we might need to do at any stage, we have to construe the claim. And so we'll do some claim construction in the IPR. We might also do claim construction in litigation. Indeed, this is a really big moment for claim construction. When someone sues me on a patent, we might start off by fighting about what do the claims mean. And that's going to have impact for everything. Depending what your claim means, it might not be valid. It might be obvious, it might be anticipated, you might not have described it, it might not be valid. Depending on what your claim means, I might not do it. If you're accusing me of infringing and then we sharpen as to what your claim means, I might at the end of that say, hey, I actually don't do it that way. I don't use cheese, I use something else to attract the mouse. And so we'll do claim construction in litigation as well. Indeed, in that moment, we have a lot of procedure. There's a special kind of system for evaluating claims. It's named after a famous case. The case involved a party named Markman. And so we have what we call these Markman hearings and Markman orders and Markman processes. Markman, again, just named after this case. But what it is that a district court, when they get a patent case, usually about 18 months in, will call all the lawyers together and do a hearing, just the judge and the lawyers, no jury. They'll do a hearing on claim construction. It's called a Markman hearing. And we're 18 months in, so everybody knows a lot. They know about what they're trying to argue about validity. They know what they're trying to argue about infringement. They know what they're going to argue. And now we come to court and basically get a chance to say to the judge, claim 2, there's this phrase, and we disagree about exactly what it means. I think it means this, he thinks it means that, and we put in evidence and try to make the case for each of these opposing views. And again, it happens about 18 months into the case, which is early as compared to the full flow. A patent case, you might not get to jury for 3 years. And so almost halfway through, we talk about the patent. We don't talk about the case. We don't talk about the next stuff like do you infringe or how much money. We talk about the patent and very specifically about the claims. What do the claims mean? And this Markman process is so important to these fights that a huge percentage of the cases settle once the judge rules as to what the claims mean. So 18 months in, we hear all the stuff. The judge then will ultimately issue an order saying, I understand there's a dispute about the word dark and what it means. Here are the views, here's the evidence, and I'm going to tell the jury in another 12 months, another 18 months, when the jury is sitting before me, I'm going to tell the jury the dark means, and the judge will then tell us what it's going to be defined to mean. And as I say, huge percentage of the cases settle right then. Because once I know what the claim means, usually I can figure out how good each of the other arguments are going to be. Is it anticipated? Well, now that I know what the claim means, I can kind of figure that out. So too infringement and all the other issues. So claim construction is huge, really important, a really decisive moment in regular old patent litigation. About 18 months in, we figure that out. Now, a couple more things just before we dig into a bunch of examples. First, I just wanted to show you some of the documents. We don't have to loiter much on this, but there really is this generation of documents. When I apply for a patent and the patent office responds to me, we'll go back and forth, and we get these things called office actions, where the government writes up, here's where we are, you wrote the following 5 claims, this one's okay, this one's not, here's why. We'll also get kind of this iterative kind of line editing of the claims. Here's just a quick example. You can see they crossed some stuff off. They added some other language. We do all this back and forth with the government while we're sharpening the original application. And this is then fantastic evidence about what the claims actually mean. When you get to litigation, for instance, much later, and we're arguing as what does the claim mean, this evidence, we call it intrinsic evidence, I-N-T-R-I-N-S-I-C, intrinsic evidence. This evidence is great evidence of what the claim actually was supposed to mean. We have these documents back and forth. We have the government saying that claim's no good, here's why. Then the applicant makes a change, or the examiner says, I don't like the claim this way, but if you add this word, it'll solve the problem for me. Great. We have wonderful information from that back and forth with the government about what the claim actually means. It's intrinsic evidence, really valued, influential evidence from the prosecution history. Other intrinsic evidence is the rest of the document. If I have a claim, it's at the end of a document that has drawings, that has prose. All of that is also intrinsic evidence, really influential evidence as to what the claims mean. And then if we're in court, for instance, and we're still fighting, we've looked at all the intrinsic evidence, we still have a dispute, then other evidence can come in, sure. We'll look at maybe a treatise, a scholarly article. We'll look at other stuff that might help us understand the claim language. But that stuff is all deeply secondary. Intrinsic evidence, kind of the evidence that was generated alongside the claims by this party, that's our best evidence as to what the claims mean. It's got to be stuff in the record, stuff they gave to the government, stuff that's published with the patent. It can't be like my secret note to myself. But evidence that was created during this interaction that leads to the patent, that's really powerful evidence. And so we'll get a bunch of that from the prosecution history. All right, there's a dinosaur on my screen. Why? The slides I'm about to walk through with you contain a bunch of examples of real patents in real cases of consequence, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, inventions that mattered to the world. The examples I'm about to do with you are real patents from real cases. And part of my ambition is to show you kind of what am I talking about? What kind of disputes might we have where there's a claim, it was written in the patent prosecution interaction. So lawyers and the government let it through, they endorsed it, it issued, and yet here we are, fighting about what it means. I want to show you a bunch of examples. And these examples come from a deck. I did a presentation to a bunch of the Federal Circuit judges. It was at a big conference, and we were talking about language and its imperfections. And I had a theme with the judges. What I wanted to point out to them is that this is actually really hard. That there are mistakes, there are confusions, there are ambiguities, there are imperfections in claim language, even when we try really hard. Even when we're working on a patent that really does matter, that was taken seriously. And I wanted to use that to kind of signal to the judges that we might need to tweak what we do in the courtroom, recognizing that there are going to be these imperfections and we have to embrace them rather than punishing them necessarily. And you'll see that more as we go, but I started my talk with a joke. And the joke really helps kind of set the tone for what I wanted to show the judges and kind of what I want to show you as well. And it's an old joke, it's not even mine. It's set in some museum and there are some dinosaur bones and the guide is walking a crowd around and they get to the dinosaur bones and the guide says, these bones are 2,004 years old, 36 hours and 22 minutes. And a little kid raises his hand like, wow, yeah, how do you know? 2 million and 4 years, and how do you know? And the guide says, well, when I was hired 4 years and 32 hours ago, they told me the bones were 2 million years old. And so now they're, and he's obviously added the numbers together. And the joke, of course, is trying to point out the problem of false precision. When the guide was hired in my silly joke, he was told 2 million, but that wasn't a perfectly precise number. And so when he adds precision on top of it, the number of days he worked at the museum, you're missing the point. False precision. And that's kind of how I think about claim construction and what's so messy about it. We're going to roll up our sleeves as lawyers and do all this fancy lawyer work, but we're building on, people try, but an imperfect base. And so I was trying to show that to the judges, and dinosaurs are my reminder, hey, watch out for false precision. Don't imagine it's so perfect. It's probably not. So let me show you some examples in that spirit. The first patent I want to show you is a patent for a drug called Xyrem. This is a drug that's used to meter sleep. For example, if you have narcolepsy, or if you have trouble kind of sleeping through the night, if you're having weird sleep patterns, Xyrem was the state-of-the-art drug that you would take, and basically you would take the drug right before bedtime. You'd then set an alarm, ironically, wake yourself up in the middle of the night, take a second dose, and if you did the 2 doses, interrupting your sleep annoyingly, if you did the 2 doses, it would help you get a good night's sleep. And I had some evidence to suggest this really helped with a wide range of sleep-related challenges. There's a huge litigation about Xyrem because it was a blockbuster drug, which again is shocking to me because it seems so imperfect. It's a drug to help me sleep and I got to wake up in the middle of the night to take a dose. But it was a blockbuster drug. A lot of other companies wanted to make generic versions of the drug, and so there was a fight about the patents. The generic companies wanted to blow up the patents so they could make generic versions. And this is one of the patents that was litigated. Here's the claim language, and let me read you a little piece of it so you can get a sense of it, and then I want to talk to you about where they had a fight. What was the Markman hearing about? What was the potential ambiguity they fought about? Here's the claim. It says it's a method of treating a condition responsive to sodium gamma hydroxybutyrate. This is just the active ingredient in the drug. They call it GHB. So a method of treating a condition responsive to GHB comprising orally administering to a patient afflicted with the condition an aqueous composition. So you're taking it by the mouth. You're a patient, it's a water-based composition comprising a first dose of about 4.5 to 10 grams of sodium GHB within an hour prior to initial sleep onset, and an aqueous composition comprising a second dose of about 4.5 to 10 grams within 2 to 5 hours. Again, this is my point to you. You take a dose, you go to sleep, you set an alarm, you take another dose. Where in the aqueous composition, the first dose and the second dose each comprises a respective concentration of sodium GHB that's greater than 500 milligrams per milliliter. So they tell you about the concentration of the dose, wherein the condition is selected from all these sleep challenges, apnea, sleep time disturbances, narcolepsy, and so on. That's their patent. It's a method of treating you with this drug at a certain dose pattern and concentration. Seems pretty clear. But they fought about this. this language about concentration. Why? Well, it turns out when you take this drug, you're told on the label to take it in a big glass of water. That obviously means you have a different concentration. There's a concentration in the vial that you purchase, that you get from, say, the pharmacy. But then there's a different concentration you might have if you mix it in a big glass of water. And the claim language doesn't tell you which one is the measuring moment. Do I measure concentration in the vial, or do I measure concentration when I've taken it with a big glass of water? And obviously that might matter if we measure the one time and we're supposed to measure it the other time. It might be that I don't infringe because I don't have this concentration at that time. A detail I think the lawyers just missed. While they were trying to write a really good claim, it didn't dawn on them to further specify when you do the measurement. And the court, tried to dig into the language, go figure that out. I worry about false precision. Maybe the answer isn't buried in the documents. Maybe the answer isn't buried in a drawing. Maybe we just missed it, and we need to now think about what it was supposed to be, even if we don't have good evidence to go hunting for in the documents. Maybe they just missed it. Here's another one in the same case involving the same drug. They had all sorts of trouble with these patents. This time, again, you know the basic setup. This patent was for a pharmaceutical composition. Remember, last time was the method of treatment. Here's how much to take. Here's the concentration. This one is for the drug, a pharmaceutical composition consisting essentially of an aqueous solution in this concentration, malic acid as a pH adjusting agent, wherein the composition is a pH of about 7.5, and wherein the composition is chemically stable and resistant to microbial growth, and wherein the composition has no preservatives. And again, just to give you some background, this is really what the drug company figured out. We already knew about GHB when they showed up on the scene. What they figured out was how to make it shelf stable, how to set it up so that over time it wouldn't have microbial growth. And over time you wouldn't need to use preservatives, it would still be just fine, it would maintain and so on. That's really what they came up with, and so this patent really spoke to the thing they achieved. It's a pharmaceutical composition, it has this active ingredient, and looky here, it doesn't have these problems. What was the Markman issue? What's the ambiguity, the confusion, the uncertainty about this language? Well, this phrase, resistant to microbial challenge. The lawyers in the document, in the actual patent, in the prose, had explained what it means, that resistant to microbial challenge means that the formulations meet the criteria set by the FDA for products made with water bases, which for bacteria means, and they explain what it means. So they explained when they wrote resistant to microbial challenge, when they wrote resistant to microbial growth, that they're referring back to the FDA standard. But by the time they litigate the case, the FDA had changed its standard. The FDA decided that a little more bacteria is fine. It doesn't have to be this good. And so the FDA rules had changed. The litigation question there was, wait a minute, they wrote in their claim this phrase and they defined it. Intrinsic evidence, they defined it in their spec. Do they have to live with that? And of course, if they had to live with that, it means the generic company can enter the market. They would in essence say, we have a little more bacteria. It's fine, the FDA approves us, but we have more bacteria than what they wrote about, therefore we don't infringe the patent. They said resistant to microbial growth, they defined it. We aren't. I mean, we are, which is to say we do resist microbial growth, but we don't do it to the extreme that they wrote about, because they wrote about the then current law, and the law has changed. What do we do? The courts, what they like to do is go read that paragraph out loud and say, we know what it means, you defined it. False precision. I know they wrote about it, but they didn't really mean to say that if the FDA changes its rules, we no longer think we invented something. I've mentioned in prior videos this cool example. There's the guy, Dr. Lowe, who figured out that a pregnant woman, if you get a blood drop from her fingertip, gets a little blood sample in mom's bloodstream, is genetic information about an unborn child. And the biology happening is that the cells of the unborn child, some of them shed, they die, they get replaced. And when the unborn child's cells go through that process, those cells release fragments of DNA. It's called cell-free DNA. And it gets swept up in mom's bloodstream. That's how we get rid of it. It goes, it's baby's cells, releases the genetic material, goes into mom's bloodstreams, and gets cleared by mom's body. And so if you get a sample of mom's blood, you can figure out something about baby's DNA. In mom's blood is a bunch of mom's DNA, but also baby's. And I've talked about this in other videos because it's a great example, for instance, about subject matter. Fine. Here, I want to show you the patent that Dr. Lowe, the guy who figured that stuff out, was using to try to keep other folks at bay. And here's the patent that he used. Check out the claim language and what the potential issue is for a Markman hearing. What's he claim? A method for detecting a paternally inherited nucleic acid of fetal origin. What you have to do first is make sure you've got some baby in there. If you get a blood drop from mom, it's possible all you'll have is mom's genetic material, because as you can imagine, there's very little of the baby's genetic material that makes it all the way to mom's bloodstream. And so the first thing you have to do is get a blood sample from mom and check, do I have some baby in there? If I do, I can then study that and learn a lot about the kid. If I don't, I'll just be learning about mom, and mom's right there. I don't need to learn about mom. And so he says the method for detecting a paternally inherited nucleic acid of fetal origin. And what he wants to say, I think, is if you take a blood drop from mom and what you find is dad stuff in there, it means you got baby. If you take a blood drop from mom and you find only mom genetic material, you just got mom. But if you take a blood drop from mom and there's paternally inherited nucleic acid, you got baby. Now you can take that sample, study it, and learn a lot about the kid. So a method for detecting a paternally inherited nucleic acid of fetal origin performed on a maternal serum or plasma sample. So I took blood from mom, from a pregnant female, which method comprises, and then he says you amplify it, detect. He just says basically do the stuff we do for genetic material to pull it out, see what's there. Anyone figure out what was the Markman fight in this case? Markman challenge here is paternally. It's not quite what he meant. Yes, sometimes baby's genetic material is paternally inherited, and that's why it's non-mom. But what he really wanted to say was non-mom, because sometimes the genetic material of interest is, say, there was some tweak, some damage to the baby's DNA. And so they got a little bit of mom, a little bit of dad, but something happened and there was some sort of mistranscription, some change, some hit to the genetic material, and all of a sudden baby is different from both mom and dad. And indeed that might be why there's some medical challenge we have to address for baby. What he meant was non-mom. What he really wanted to look for is give me a blood sample from mom, and if any of the genetic material there is not mom, it must be baby. That's the only other source. But they wrote paternally inherited, so it left out a bunch of stuff, and arguably it implied that we know who dad is. I'm thinking like I'm running some sort of really bad talk show now. Come on out, dad! But paternally inherited sounds like we know who dad is. And indeed, when you look at the original research Dr. Lowe did, in all of his examples, he met mom and dad. He took blood samples from mom and dad and used that to figure out that, woo, there's some baby in mom's blood. He kind of always knew who dad was. And so the Markman fight was when he wrote paternally inherited nucleic acid, did it have to be from dad? And did we have to know who dad was under this claim language? And again, I don't think that's what he intended to write, but gosh, that is what he wrote. In 2020 hindsight, he should have written non-mom. Here's another one. Love this. So in your eye, there's a bunch of liquid that flows around. And in a lot of folks, as you get older, the pressure from that liquid kind of builds. And we think one reason that it builds is there's this canal, if you will, around the edge of your eye that's designed to drain those liquids. It's called Schlem's canal. And it's designed to take that liquid and relieve the pressure and kind of keep your eye washed over. And for whatever reason, lots of folks, as you get older, the canal kind of collapses and doesn't work, meaning eye pressure goes up. And it's a cause of blindness and other sad things as you get older. The technology on your screen was a little tiny insert made of a material that I could put into your eye, small enough that it fits inside your eye. And basically it's kind of like scaffolding that goes into Schlemm's canal, holds it open, leaves all these holes for the liquid to flow so it can still drain, and we can put it in your eye. And the idea was, and this is real, like folks are doing this now, if you're coming in to get eye surgery anyway, let's say you have a cataract, another thing lots of us get as we get older. Let's say you get a cataract, and so you're coming in to get eye surgery anyway to deal with the cataract. Maybe we'll slip this thing in your still totally fine Schlemm's canal, reinforcing it so you don't have this problem later. This was the cool scientific achievement, the design, creation of this little bit of scaffolding, if you will. Super tiny, just to show you proportions against a quarter. There it is in the eye. Here's the patent language, and we don't need to go into great detail, but just check out the flow of it. They want to patent this little bit of scaffolding. So what is claimed is an aqueous humor shunt device. Aqueous humor is the water-based liquid in the eye. A shunt is kind of like a tube that moves something from one place to another. An aqueous humor shunt device to divert aqueous humor in the eye from this one place, the anterior chamber, into Schlemm's canal. The shunt device comprising a distal portion having at least one terminal aspect, sized and shaped to be received within a portion of Schlemm's canal, and a proximal portion having at least one terminal aspect, sized and shaped to be received within the anterior chamber of the eye, and so on. What do they fight about? Well, the patent, and I get why they did this, they wrote sized and shaped to be received. They talked about the shunt, the tube, and explained its size and shape. What they probably wanted to say was sized and shaped and actually used in. That's the magic of this. It's not that it's just some little tube that you could put in your eye. It's a little tube that you actually safely can put in your eye and it'll work and you won't have a bad reaction and we could leave it there and so on. But they wrote sized and shaped. And so in the litigation, the other side, who wanted to make a competing product, they said, we found prior art. We found a really small tube that has two ends and it's small enough that you could put it in your eye. Please don't. But it's small enough that you could. It is sized and shaped. And so if this language literally just goes to the size and the shape, prior art anticipated, you lose. What the court had to do was think about, well, what does it mean when we say sized and shaped? Does it mean something more than just the size and the shape? Is it talking about its function and purpose, its actual use? We had to fight about what this phrase means. A couple more. And again, I want to show you real patents. We don't get to do a lot of them in the videos. These were all real patents, and these are consequential ones. Not like the silly example I start the unit with, the dog bowl. These are really important patents on achievements that really can make people's lives better. The lawyers know it when they're writing these patents that these are big deal fights. And even in that world, it's hard to write great claim language. You just don't realize some stuff. You don't think of some stuff. And there's this other side in the case who's looking for it. Where can I find some wiggle room? Where can I find a weakness? It's a really hard pattern even when we're trying. We go through the patent office, they approve it, we have a lot of money at our back. Even with all of that, look how hard this is. Here's another medical one. Again, I'm blown away by what some of the things we can do. Open heart surgery used to be our solution when your heart valves weren't closing the way they should. Apparently, in lots of folks, as you get older, your heart valves don't close perfectly. They leave a little bit of a gap, which lets blood flow the wrong way at the wrong times. And we used to do open heart surgery. We used to literally go in while you're alive, right? Your heart is beating. And we'd go in and, in essence, take a needle and thread, if you will, and we'd try to sew together the valve a little bit. And they used to sew them such that the valve would be sewn into like a figure 8 form with kind of the stitches in the middle. This was open heart surgery, scary, high risky, amazing. It did work, but not my favorite path to go down. Somebody said, hey, I got a better way. I figured out a way, this tiny device, it's kind of got two clamps on the edges, you could see in the picture, and you could feed it through the circulatory system, feed it all the way to the heart, put that thing, the valves open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, and you could stick this thing in quick enough, slide it in when it's open, it'll grab the two flaps and hold them together. It'll kind of do what we would have done in open heart surgery. We'd go in and tie it together with needle and thread. Don't need to. Put my clip in instead. No longer is it open heart surgery. I'm going to go in through your circulatory system, so a little cut, and we'll weave this thing in, and we can do this intervention so much more safely. That was the thing they invented. Here you can see it actually holding some valve tissue in cross-section. Here's the patent. Here's a drawing. It's grabby things. Two grabby things I can grab. And remarkable, your heart's beating so fast, and this thing can grab those moving flaps, hold them together, and solve the problem. Here's the language. We won't read it all. They patented a fixation device for engaging heart valve tissue, said device comprising a coupling member, so it's going to hold stuff together, a pair of fixation elements, each of the pair having a first end, a free end opposite the first end, and an engagement surface there between for engaging the tissue. The first end being pivotally coupled to the coupling member, blah, 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 blah. What I want to focus on is this idea of the free end opposite the first end. And what I think they meant to point out is this. If you think of that grabber, there's a free end that moves, and it's going to actually move and grab the tissue, and there's kind of an anchored end on the other edge that holds this piece to the rest of the mechanism. And I think they meant the free end to be referring to this piece that moves. What's the litigation? Well, the parties end up fighting over what does it mean to be free? Such a good question. What does it mean? What does it mean to be free? And the reason they had to fight about it is this was the accused infringing device. Those ends closed to grab the heart valve tissue. I think of this like a knee joint. And the distinction is the original invention kind of is like a finger. And so the free end is the tip of the finger. It moves wonderfully in all sorts of different directions. This knee joint moved in the directions we needed, but it's not free in the same way, at least, which is to say this one's like a knee. It's connected on both ends, hip and foot in the knee example. Here you can see it's connected on both edges. And so the fight was, what does it mean to be free? Does it mean like it's all alone and standing out there all by itself? Does it just refer to certain degrees of freedom, which this thing then has? What is a free end? And my theme to the judges, and what I want to point out to you, in addition to showing you a bunch of examples, is I'm not mad at the lawyer for messing that up. What he wrote kind of makes sense, I think, upon like when you do something amazing, like a really new, exciting achievement, I don't know that I expect you to write a perfect set of words about it. Free end isn't a ridiculous way to explain the invention. And I don't expect the lawyer to realize to think ahead necessarily. What if they do it with a knee joint? You might say to yourself, isn't it weird that we do claim construction? After all, when the claims are originally written, we do it with the government in an interactive process that's judged. Patent prosecution. Isn't it weird that once we do that, we still have to construe the claims? In court, for example, later on. And I think that's just part of doing hard stuff. The government, bureaucrat, the original lawyer, I get it, they try really hard to write us good claims, but it's hard to do this perfectly, especially when you're doing something amazing. Imagine I asked you on day one, the first time you met the internet, to write me a sentence as to what the internet is. It would have been really hard. Yet now, after a bunch of years of experience, maybe we could write that kind of sentence. So too in these examples. I think when someone does something amazing, we try really hard to document it, drawings, prose. We have all these legal rules, written description, enablement, rules about how you write claims. We're trying real hard. But my message to the judges were, we shouldn't be so judgy. It's hard to do this well. We're going to have to make some room for imperfections. Look at these high stakes, really important fights and the kind of things the lawyers understandably maybe didn't realize as they wrote the claims. Here, free end. Where does that take us? With the judges, and also now with you, it takes us to the need for another legal rule. So we've been talking so far about claim construction. What does the claim actually mean? What does it actually say? And that's the Markman process, and you've got a taste of it. After that, patent law says we will give you more than your literal claim scope. And it's another legal rule that I want to introduce called the doctrine of equivalence. And the doctrine of equivalence says you get what you literally wrote. So you're going to write your claim, we're going to construe it, we're going to decide that a free end means, quote, whatever it is. But then, assuming you pass some tests, in court, we're going to let you argue close enough. That knee joint might not literally fall within the scope of my claim. I might not have exactly captured it in words. It might not literally fall within the scope of my claim. But it's infringing anyway. And the way you get to argue that close enough argument is called the doctrine of equivalence. And as I write this into the slide, the effective scope of a patent claim is greater than that described by the literal language. So we do the literal language, we construe it, and then you also can get the doctrine of equivalence. Courts talk about this in different ways. I don't know how helpful any of it is, but they say you can go after like insubstantial differences, or you can go after the accused product if it does substantially the same function, substantially the same way to obtain the same result. They have this language, but the intuition is wiggle room. And so if my patent talked about cheese and you used food, I can't argue that food is cheese, but I might be able to argue that food is close enough. When I said cheese, that told you enough that we should deem food to be an equivalent. In this context, it's not always equivalent, but in this context it is. The doctrine of equivalence. And as I was about to say in the next slide, but just to make sure we're picturing the same thing, if the blue dot is the scope of your claim, literally what your claim covers, the doctrine of equivalence gives you a little more. It gives you a little more room to play in. We've seen this kind of move before in the patent system. Remember in the prior art video, I pointed out to you we have two verbs: anticipation, all elements in a single reference, and then this idea of obviousness. And obviousness is kind of a close enough doctrine, right? We don't have all elements in a single reference, but come on, if someone skilled in the art looked at that thing, they would have understood your invention already. It's a close enough kind of doctrine. Here too, we do the same thing. When we read a claim, we ask first, what does it literally cover? Exactly, precisely. And then we add the wiggle room, this time under the doctrine of equivalence. When I was talking to the judges, I was in essence trying to champion, let's be nice under the doctrine of equivalence. And the reason I is the courts have been really hostile to the doctrine of equivalence. We have lots of cases where the judges say, you should have written me a better claim. If you wanted more, you should have realized that and written better language. And throughout my career, I push back against that a little bit and say, no, we have the doctrine of equivalence for good reasons. Sometimes it's just stopping us from having to be unnecessarily careful. Don't have to cross every T and dot every I. The doctrine of equivalence might just give us some wiggle room. You know what I mean, and I know what I mean. Cool it, right? It might just give us some wiggle room. More importantly, though, it allows us to protect patent value in examples like the ones in this deck, these dinosaur examples, where it's not that the lawyer was sloppy and didn't cross a T or dot an I, it's that they wrote about the thing in a very reasonable way, and it just turns out to maybe not be perfect as we come back and look at it years later. And I was trying to champion to them, we should leave the door open warmly for the doctrine of equivalence. Don't go crazy. I want the patent to be clean, because I want people to be able to read it and understand what it covers. And the more wiggle room you give the patent holder, the more everyone else is unsure. Like, I don't know what the patent covers. It all depends what's deemed to be equivalent. And so we have to be careful not to be too generous with the doctrine of equivalence. But there is a place for flexibility. And I was trying to champion that in this talk to show everybody, look at what the doctrine of equivalence can do. I focused so far on using the doctrine of equivalence to solve little problems. the lawyer didn't foresee some complexity, there's some ambiguity in the language. I've mainly used those sorts of examples. But maybe the most important piece of the doctrine of equivalence is the piece that makes claims kinda future-proof. Here's the example. Imagine I was the inventor of the tennis shoe. And so I wrote a patent, and in the claims, I described my achievement as a shoe with a tongue and a sole and laces. And note, by the way, I would have taught all of those vocabulary words. I would have explained what a tongue is. No, it's not something in the mouth in this context. I would have explained what a sole is. Again, not what you might normally think. But for our purposes, I want to focus on laces. It would have been very intuitive to write that patent and say it's a shoe, blah, 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 with laces. But now fast forward, and after a bunch of years, somebody else invents Velcro. Now, Velcro is its own amazing achievement. There is a patent on Velcro and all sorts of wonderful uses of Velcro. But focus on the use of Velcro in tennis shoes. Velcro replaces laces. And indeed, in certain parts of the market today, right, folks prefer Velcro tennis shoes. Maybe if you're kind of old, you'd rather not have to bend over to tie the laces. Maybe if you're really young, your parents don't want to tie the laces for you, so they use Velcro. But the question in the patent system would be, if I have a patent on the tennis shoe and you made a Velcro tennis shoe, is that still a tennis shoe? And the element I'm focusing on, laces, that's the tough one, because is Velcro really a lace? And if we went back and did the normal stuff I do at the beginning of the video and say, let's look at the words, let's look at the intrinsic evidence, what did they write, what did they say, what do the drawings show, we might say no, laces are laces, and we could figure out what that means, but gosh, it doesn't mean Velcro. And then in comes the doctrine of equivalence. This time not to fix some sort of little writing mistake or something you didn't anticipate that you maybe sort of possibly could have. This time it's coming in to say Velcro is a brand new, unforeseeable achievement that is orthogonal to what this patent's really about. When you said laces, you were talking about a way to hold the shoe on the foot, to close the two pieces together in a stable, long-lasting fashion that is still removable. We can imagine kind of explaining what laces are and then saying out loud that, you know what, in this setting, in this use, Velcro is equivalent. And what's important about this example is it makes that patent in the tennis shoe future-proof. If we didn't have this move, you would write a patent on whatever your cool new achievement is, and you'd think to yourself, man, there's a risk that at some point in my patent term, at some point in the next 20 years, someone's going to come up with something that really isn't spot on to what I'm doing. Someone might do that too. I invent tennis shoes, you invent Crocs. And maybe Crocs come in and they compete with tennis shoes, and maybe, fine, that's competition, that's innovation, we can live with that. But you'd be thinking to yourself, there's also the possibility of something happening that isn't really in my market. It's a brand new achievement that would still gut my patent. And that's what would happen. If Velcro tennis shoes aren't tennis shoes, all of a sudden my patent value plummets. Not because you invented some competing shoe that people like better, but because of this surprising, unforeseeable new technology that happens to have a big implication here. And the doctrine of equivalence, with some constraints, with some guardrails, protects that patent. It says, I kind of understand why you didn't write about Velcro. Velcro hadn't even been invented yet. And so we're going to look at this again today, right now, in the context of this legal fight, and ask, is Velcro, this new thing, equivalent? And it really protects patent value over time for these sorts of orthogonal achievements. Velcro is awesome. Velcro still gets its patent. Indeed, you can't make a Velcro tennis shoe without licensing both the tennis shoe patent and the Velcro patent. But we've protected the tennis shoe patent by giving this equivalence protection. And what I really like about this, what I think is really interesting about this, is this is clearly an example where I'm not saying the lawyer should have written a better claim. We don't expect the lawyer to have invented Velcro and written about it. And so the doctrine of equivalence is giving us a different kind of flexibility here flexibility to protect patents against unforeseeable technological change. All right, that's what I wanted to cover in this video. Big takeaway is I wanted you to see a bunch of examples. I wanted you to see real claim language, see how hard it is to write real claim language. I wanted you to see a little bit about the process. Those are Markman hearings where we go into court and argue what do the claims mean, kind of arguing strategically. I want it to mean this because then I'm going to point out to you that the patent's invalid. Or I want it to mean that because then I'm going to argue that you infringe. Right? These Markman hearings where we fight about what the language means, and then just some of the legal basics. Intrinsic evidence is this really important evidence that kind of was born with the patent. It's the file history back and forth at the patent office. It's the drawings, it's the prose. That's great evidence of what the claim language really means. Lastly, as you all know, we also introduced the doctrine of equivalence, which adds this flexibility. If I just look at your claim language, literally, I get one sense of what it is that you have rights to, and then we come back and give you a little bit more. We give you this flexibility so long as you didn't trip up a couple guardrails that the system has built in.